buried his wife and then returned to the fields. The opening of our story feels like a contradiction, but it is the truth of how the most resilient people live when tragedy and responsibility collide. In the flat lands of Iowa, where the horizon stretches out in every direction and the soil holds the memories of generations, a 78-year-old farmer named Earl stood at the edge of a freshly turned patch of earth. It was early morning. The light was soft, and the air carried the smell of damp soil. His hands were calloused from 50 years of labor on the same land his father had once claimed with sweat and sacrifice. Beside him lay a simple wooden marker bearing his wife's name. His heart ached with a rawness that words could not fully describe, but he knew what he needed to do next. He
Time
walked
to get
away
this
from the
land
grave,
ready.
climbed onto his old tractor,
Morning, mister.
and
Back
began
to work.
the day's work. This channel celebrates the backbone of America, the farmers and ranchers who feed the nation and keep the heartland alive. It honors the men and women who work through every season, who carry the weight of generations on their shoulders, and who remain unbroken long after the storms have passed. Through stories like Earl's, we explore what it means to stand your ground when everything tells you to quit. In this story, there are no conversations and no direct dialogue. Instead, the narration invites you into the heart of a farmer who has spent half a century on the land his father bought with hope and perseverance. Earl Mitchell was born on this farm. He was the second son in a family that believed in hard work, faith, and the dignity of honest labor. His father taught him how to drive a tractor before he could reach the pedals without sitting on a pile of burlap sacks. His mother showed him how to pull weeds gently so as not to disturb the roots. The farm was their classroom, their livelihood, and their place of worship. Every furrow in the soil held a lesson about patience, resilience, and respect for the land. Every barn beam and fence post carried the weight of stories from those who came before. When Earl was 20, he met Mary, a girl from the neighboring town who loved the smell of fresh hay and the sound of rain on a tin roof. They built a life together that revolved around the rhythms of the farm. They raised crops, cattle, and 3 children. They weathered droughts, floods, and market crashes. They laughed at simple pleasures like a bountiful harvest or a newborn calf finding its footing. They prayed together when times were hard and gave thanks when times were good. They shared a love that was not flashy or dramatic.
You learn
but
to
steady
appreciate the
like
simple things
seasons.
out here. Hard
Decades
work,
passed.
honest
The
weather,
farm changed
and
as
a good
modern
sunset.
equipment replaced horses and mules, and as neighbors sold their land to developers. Earl and Mary held on to their acreage with stubborn pride. They saw their children leave for different paths. One went to the city, another joined the military. The youngest stayed close, but eventually moved to a town a few miles away to work as a teacher. The farm became quieter, yet the responsibilities did not lessen. Earl and Mary adapted to new realities, but they never considered giving up. The soil under their feet
Time to
was
get
more
this
than
land
property.
ready.
It was a living testament
Morning,
to their
mister.
family's
Back to
story.
work.
When Mary fell ill in late autumn, the fields were ready for harvest. Earl spent his days moving between the hospital and the combine. He wished he could split himself in 2. One version to sit by her bedside holding her hand, the other to run the machines that would bring in the corn and soybeans before the first frost. Mary insisted that he keep working. She knew that the land did not wait for grief. She understood that the harvest provided not only food, but the means to pay medical bills and keep the farm afloat. Earl would leave the hospital at dawn, drive to the fields, and return with the sun setting, his clothes covered in dust and his heart heavy with worry. The community rallied around them. Neighbors brought casseroles, fresh bread, and a listening ear. The pastor stopped by with words of comfort and prayers. Fellow farmers offered to help with the harvest. Earl accepted some assistance, but he still felt responsible. He did not want to burden others. He believed that the strength of a man could be measured by the weight he was willing to carry. Mary reminded him that asking for help did not make him weak. It meant that they were part of a community that cared. When Mary died, the first light of dawn was just beginning to paint the sky. Earl sat by her side, a frail hand in his. She took a final breath, and the room filled with a quiet that felt heavier than any storm. Earl closed his eyes and whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for the years they had shared. He stood up, kissed her forehead, and made his way home. He called the children, notified the pastor, and began to make arrangements. The day of the funeral came. Friends and family gathered under a broad oak tree near the farmhouse.
You learn to appreciate
where
the
Mary
simple
loved to
things
sit
out
in the
here.
evenings and watch the sun
Hard
set
work,
behind the fields.
honest weather, and a good
The
sunset.
burial was simple. Earl chose the spot himself. It was near the edge of the north pasture, a place that offered a view of the rolling hills and the barn. He dug part of the grave with his own hands before the undertaker arrived, feeling each scoop of soil as though it was an act of devotion. He did not cry in front of others. He saved his tears for later when the moon was high and the fields lay silent. When the service concluded and the last of the mourners had gone home, Earl remained. He stood at the grave until the shadows lengthened. Then he walked back to the house, changed into his work clothes, and went to the barn. The animals
Time to
needed
get this
feeding.
land ready.
The fields needed tending.
Morning, mister.
The cycles
Back to
of
work.
life continued. For Earl, returning to the fields after burying his wife was not a dismissal of his grief. It was the only way he knew to honor her. The land had been the foundation of their life together. Every row they had planted, every fence they had built, and every harvest they had gathered was a testament to their partnership. To neglect the farm would have been to neglect her memory. The work became both a distraction and a therapy. As he guided the tractor across the fields, he talked to Mary in his mind. He remembered her laughter, her quiet strength, and the way she could tell the weather by the smell of the wind. He felt her presence in the rustle of the corn and the chirp of the cicadas. The first chapter of the story sets the scene for a journey through grief, labor, and resilience. It invites you into the world of a man who embodies the values that built this country: faith, family, perseverance, and the dignity of honest work. As you read on, consider your own connections to the land, to the people you love, and to the traditions that shape your identity. Have you ever faced a moment when duty called you back to work, even though your heart was broken? Share your experiences in the comments if you feel moved, and if you appreciate stories about ordinary heroes who face extraordinary challenges. Consider following along as we continue this journey. The night after Mary was laid to rest, Earl did not sleep. He sat in his kitchen with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. The house felt too quiet. The chair Mary always chose remained pulled slightly away from the table, as if she might walk in at any
Time
moment.
to get this land ready.
Outside, the wind
Morning,
moved
mister.
through the trees,
Back to work.
making the barn creak and the windmill spin. Earl listened to the familiar sounds and found them both comforting and lonely. He had known solitude before, when long days in the fields left him alone with his thoughts. But this was different. This was the kind of solitude that settled into your bones and asked you who you were without the person you loved beside you. As dawn approached, Earl stood up, washed his cup, and put on his boots. He stepped onto the porch and breathed in the cold morning air. The sky was a deep blue,
You learn
fading
to
to lighter
appreciate the
shades
simple
near
things
the
out
horizon. A thin
Hard
mist
work,
hung over the fields.
honest weather,
He walked
and a good
to the
sunset.
barn, opened the heavy wooden door, and was greeted by the warm smell of hay and the soft sounds of animals stirring. The cows turned their heads to look at him. The chickens clucked softly. The barn cats weaved around his feet. This place was alive and needed his care. He fed the animals, checked on the tractor, and prepared for the day's tasks. There were fences to mend, machinery to repair, and winter preparations to begin. Mary had always handled many of the daily chores that kept the household running. She cooked hearty meals that nourished both body and soul. She kept the books, balancing the farm's finances with the precision of an accountant. She maintained the garden where vegetables grew alongside flowers she had planted to remind her of the beauty in life. Without her, Earl faced not just the emotional loss, but the practical reality of doing everything alone. He looked around the farmhouse chaos of the half-finished sewing projects, the jars of preserves lining the pantry shelves, and the notes she had left on the refrigerator about appointments and birthdays. He felt both overwhelmed and determined. He would learn to do the tasks she had done with such grace, not because he wanted to replace her, but because he wanted to honor her. That morning he tackled the garden. The frost had not yet arrived, and there were still late tomatoes and peppers to harvest. He knelt in the dirt, his knees pressed into the soil, and carefully picked the remaining produce. Each tomato reminded him of the meals Mary would have made. He carried the basket inside and placed the vegetables on the counter. He then turned his attention to the kitchen. The sink was full of dishes from the gathering after the funeral. He rolled up his sleeves and began to wash. The simple act of scrubbing plates and cups offered a sense of normalcy. He remembered how Mary used to hum while doing dishes, a melody that had become part of the soundtrack of their life. He did not hum, but he let his mind wander through memories of her humming. Earl then spent the afternoon repairing a section of fence that had been damaged by a fallen tree branch during a recent storm. He gathered
You learn
tools,
to appreciate the
cut
simple
new
things out
posts,
here.
and reset the fence line.
Hard work,
Each
honest
swing
weather,
of the hammer felt
and a
like
good
both an act
sunset.
of creation and a release of pent-up sorrow. He worked methodically, measuring and aligning the boards, making sure the fence was strong enough to withstand the winter wind. He paused occasionally to wipe sweat from his brow and to take in the view of his land. The fields stretched out, dark lines of earth where crops once stood, now plowed and waiting for the next season. He thought about how life on the farm was a constant cycle of planting, tending, and harvesting. There was a
Time to
comfort
get
in
this
knowing
land
that
ready.
the land continued to turn and that
Morning,
he had
mister.
work to
Back
do.
to work.
In the evening, he went to the church. The building was simple, with wooden pews and a small steeple. The lights were dim, and a few candles flickered at the front. Earl sat in the back, his hands clasped together. He did not need to speak out loud to feel that he was being heard. He thanked the Creator for the years he had shared with Mary and asked for strength to carry on. The pastor had offered to visit, but Earl chose to be alone in that moment. He found solace in the ritual of walking through the doors, sitting down and feeling the quiet embrace of the sanctuary. Outside the church, the night was cold. He pulled his coat tight around him and walked home under a blanket of stars. The next day, the routine began to feel slightly less foreign. Earl wrote out a list of tasks, just as Mary had always done. He divided the chores into categories: animals, machinery, household, and finances. He discovered that the process of writing down responsibilities made them feel more manageable. He checked items off, one by one, finding satisfaction in each completed task. He called the bank to discuss accounts, something Mary had always handled. The banker expressed condolences and then walked him through the information he needed. Earl took notes, asked questions, and realized that he could learn these things. They were daunting because they were new, not because he was incapable. Throughout the week, neighbors stopped by. Some brought meals, others offered to help with larger tasks. One old friend dropped off a stack of firewood already split and ready for the stove.
Time to
Another
get this
offered
land
to fix
ready.
the roof where shingles were missing.
Morning, mister.
Earl
Back to
accepted some
work.
help and declined others. He knew that part of resilience was understanding when to lean on others and when to stand on your own. He thought about the community Mary had built through her kindness. She had always been the first to deliver soup to a sick neighbor or to organize a fundraiser when someone faced hardship. Her actions had created a network of goodwill that now flowed back to him. On the 7th day after Mary's death, Earl woke before sunrise and stood at the window. A thin layer of frost coated the ground, sparkling in the first light. He took
You
a
learn
deep
to
breath
appreciate
and
the
felt
simple
a sense
things
of
out here.
peace he had not
Hard
felt
work,
since the funeral.
honest
He
weather,
realized that
and a
grief
good
would not leave
sunset.
him anytime soon, but that it could live alongside his responsibilities. He looked out at the barn, the fields and the garden, and knew that his path forward lay in continuing the work he and Mary had started together. He knew that each day would bring moments of sadness, but also moments of quiet joy when the sun hit the dew on a spider's web or when a calf nudged his hand in search of grain. This chapter shows the immediate aftermath of loss and the way daily routines can ground a person when everything else feels unsteady. It highlights the learning curve of taking on tasks that were shared with a partner and the importance of community in times of hardship. It reminds us that honoring a loved one's memory often involves carrying on with the work that defined your shared life. As you reflect on this chapter, think about the routines that have anchored you during difficult times. How have you adapted when roles shifted unexpectedly? Share your thoughts in the comments and follow along as we continue exploring Earl's journey through grief and resilience. The days grew shorter and colder. Autumn gave way to winter, and the farm's landscape transformed. Frost coated the fields each morning, and by afternoon, the sun struggled to climb high enough to melt it completely. Earl adjusted to working in heavier clothing, his breath visible in the air as he fed the cattle and checked on the livestock. The tractor's engine groaned in the cold as he started it, and he took extra care to maintain the machinery so that it would not fail during the critical months ahead. Winter on the farm was a time of preparation and preservation. While crops lay dormant beneath the soil, the farmer planned for spring. One of the first major tasks of winter was chopping and stacking firewood. The house had a wood stove that provided both heat and comfort. Mary used to say that the smell of wood smoke made the house feel like a home. Earl chose a day when the sky was clear and crisp. He pulled the chainsaw from the tool shed, checked the fuel, and began cutting logs from the
You
dead
learn to
trees
appreciate
he'd
the
marked
simple
earlier
things
in the
out
season.
here.
He
Hard
worked
work,
steadily,
honest
the saw
weather,
buzzing through the
and a
wood,
good sunset.
sawdust settling on the ground like snow. He split the logs with an axe, feeling each strike reverberate through his arms. As he stacked the wood neatly against the house, he remembered Mary remarking about how the piles always looked like sculptures when he was finished. The chores of winter required different rhythms. There were fewer hours of daylight, so Earl began his tasks earlier in the morning and often finished after the sun set. He fed the cattle silage and hay, making sure they had enough to keep their energy up in the cold.
Time to
He
get
broke
this
the
land
ice on
ready.
the water troughs so that the animals
Morning,
could drink.
mister. Back to
He
work.
checked the barn daily for any signs of leaks or drafts. He tightened boards and replaced nails. He spread bedding straw to keep the animals warm. He carried out these tasks with a sense of purpose. Each action felt connected to Mary because they had done them together for so many years. When a heavy snowstorm arrived, Earl was ready. The wind howled across the plains and the snow piled up quickly. He had prepped the snowplow attachment for the tractor. As the storm raged, he watched from the window, sipping hot coffee. He thought about how Mary would have made chili or stew and how they would have sat at the table listening to the radio, occasionally chuckling at the announcer's exaggerated warnings. He felt her absence deeply, but he also felt her presence in his memory of those moments. When the storm ended, he put on his thickest coat, gloves, and hat, and went outside. The world was blanketed in white. The silence was profound. He started the tractor and cleared the driveway and the paths to the barn. He shoveled the steps and spread salt to prevent ice. Inside the house, he began going through Mary's recipe box. It was filled with index cards, some stained with years of use, each containing instructions for dishes she had perfected over decades. He chose a soup recipe that used the vegetables he had harvested from the garden. He chopped carrots, celery, and onions, added herbs, and let the pot simmer on the stove. The smell filled the kitchen and drifted through the house, creating a sense of warmth that went beyond physical heat. As he ate, he closed his eyes and imagined
ready.
Mary sitting across from
Morning,
him.
mister. Back to
He
work.
did not need to hear her voice to feel connected to her. The act of cooking her recipes was a form of communion. During the long winter evenings, Earl spent time reading the worn books that lined their bookshelf. He revisited farming manuals, poetry collections, and old family albums. He looked at photographs of his parents standing proudly in front of the original barn, his father's arm draped around his mother's shoulders. He smiled at pictures of himself and Mary in their youth, their hair darker, their faces unlined, their eyes full of promise.
You
He
learn to
lingered over
appreciate the simple
photographs of
things
Mary
out
holding
here.
their children,
Hard work,
her smile
honest weather,
radiant with love.
and a good sunset.
He realized that their life together had been a tapestry woven from countless small moments. Each chore, meal, and conversation had been a thread, and together they had created something enduring. One evening, he received a letter from his youngest daughter. She wrote about how her students had asked her why farmers kept working through the winter when nothing was growing. She had told them about all the tasks that kept a farm running year-round and about the importance of caring for animals and equipment. She said that she had told her class about her parents and how they had persevered through blizzards and heat waves. Earl felt a swell of pride knowing that his daughter carried the story of the farm into her classroom. He wrote back, sharing more details, and promised to visit when he could. Community events continued even in winter. The town held a holiday market in the square. People sold handmade crafts, baked goods, and knitted scarves. Earl attended for the first time without Mary. He wandered past the stalls, greeting neighbors and accepting their condolences. He purchased a wreath made of dried corn husks and hung it on the front door. He watched children play in the snow and felt a sense of continuity. Life went on, and he was still part of it. At the same time, he felt a tug of sadness when he thought about the holiday traditions he and Mary had created together, like hanging ornaments and singing carols while sipping warm cider. As the winter months wore on, Earl settled into a routine that balanced tasks, memories, and quiet reflection. He discovered that grief did not follow a straight path. Some days he felt energized, determined to tackle every chore with vigor. Other days he found it hard to get out of bed. He allowed himself to feel the highs and lows without judgment. He recognized that healing was not about forgetting Mary, but about learning to live with her absence in a way that honored her. He sought comfort in prayer, in the rhythm of chores, and in the quiet beauty of the winter landscape. He watched the sun set early,
You learn to
painting
appreciate
the
the
sky
simple
with
things
colors
out
that
here.
seemed more vivid
Hard
against the
work,
snow.
honest
This
weather,
chapter explores
and a
the
good
practical
sunset.
and emotional adjustments that come with facing the first winter alone. It illustrates how seasonal tasks can become acts of remembrance and how traditions can be both painful and comforting when a loved one is gone. It also highlights the importance of community, family, and personal reflection in navigating grief. As you contemplate this chapter, think about the rituals and routines that have helped you through difficult seasons. What activities provide you with comfort and a sense of connection
Time to get
those
this
you've
land
lost?
ready.
Share your thoughts
Morning,
if you
mister.
wish, and
Back to
continue
work.
following Earl's journey through the changing year. Spring arrived slowly, nudging the farm awake after months of cold. Patches of snow melted to reveal brown grass beneath. Buds appeared on trees, and the first brave flowers pushed up through the thawing ground. The days lengthened, giving Earl more sunlight for his work. He felt a stirring of energy as he prepared the soil for planting. Spring on a farm is a time of hope and expectation. It is the season when the land transforms from barren to burgeoning with life, and when a farmer's heart lifts with the promise of growth. One of the first tasks of spring was repairing the plows and planters. Earl brought the equipment out of the barn, inspected each piece, oiled hinges, tightened bolts, and replaced worn parts. He knew that a few hours of maintenance now would save days of frustration later. He ordered seeds based on the plan he and Mary had drafted months earlier. They had always looked over seed catalogs together, discussing the merits of different hybrids and heirlooms. He read through the notes she had written in the margins, reminding himself of her thoughts on soil conditions and planting dates. Her handwriting was a comfort, a tangible connection to her mind. He surveyed the fields, noting areas that needed extra attention. There were spots where drainage ditches had filled with silt and needed to be cleared. There were low places that might flood if heavy rains arrived. Earl dug trenches, moved stones, and used the tractor to level uneven ground. Each action was purposeful. He knew that the success of the season depended on preparation. The smell of fresh earth
Time to
filled
get
the
this
air as
land
he
ready.
turned the soil with the plow.
Morning,
He
mister.
watched as
Back to
birds
work.
followed the tractor, searching for worms and insects exposed by the turning earth. The first day of planting was both exciting and solemn. Earl loaded the seed into the planter and guided the tractor across the fields. He felt the familiar vibration under his feet and the steering wheel against his palms. Row by row, he laid down the promise of a harvest that would not come for months. Each seed was a small act of faith. He thought about how many times he and Mary had performed this ritual together. He remembered the times when they had
You learn
planted
to
side by
appreciate the
side,
simple things out
sometimes
here.
in silence,
Hard work,
sometimes sharing stories
honest
about
weather,
their children or
and a good
discussing
sunset.
plans for the barn. He smiled at the memory of Mary jumping off the tractor to rescue a turtle that had wandered into the path. Rain was always both a friend and a foe in spring. Too much and the seeds could rot. Too little and they might never germinate. Earl watched the sky closely. When rain clouds gathered on the horizon, he gauged whether he should hurry to finish a field or wait for drier conditions. One afternoon, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. The wind picked up, dark clouds gathered, and the temperature dropped. Earl raced to cover equipment and secure tarps. He drove the tractor back to the barn as raindrops began to fall, hitting the ground in heavy splashes. Inside, he listened to the rain pounding on the roof. He thought about Mary's love of rain, how she would stand on the porch and inhale deeply, saying that rain cleansed the air and refreshed the soul. On sunny days, Earl walked the perimeter of his fields checking for signs of growth. Tiny green shoots emerged from the soil, straight lines of potential stretching into the distance. He knelt to touch the tender leaves. They were delicate but determined. He marveled at how a single seed, buried in darkness, could push upward toward the light. He felt a kinship with those seeds. He too was pushing through a dark season toward the light. He thought about how Mary had believed that life mirrored the cycles of the land. There were times of dormancy, times of growth, times of harvest, and times of rest. Each stage held its own beauty and purpose. Spring also meant tending to the animals with renewed attention. Calving season began, and Earl spent nights checking on cows, ready to give birth. He kept the barn lights on low, listened for any unusual sounds, and stood ready to assist if needed. He remembered the countless births he and Mary had overseen together. He remembered the feeling of holding a newborn calf in his arms, its coat slick and warm, its
You learn
eyes
to
wide
appreciate
with
the simple
newness.
things out
He
here.
remembered the quiet
Hard work,
satisfaction of watching a mother
honest
cow
weather,
nuzzle her calf,
and a good
and the
sunset.
feeling of relief when both were healthy. Doing this alone now was bittersweet, but it also made him feel close to Mary, because these were moments they had cherished. The trees near the farmhouse began to bloom. White blossoms covered the branches, and petals drifted like snow when the wind blew. Earl gathered some branches and placed them in a vase on the kitchen table. He tended to the flower beds Mary had planted years ago. He cleared away dead stems, loosened the soil, and planted new perennials,
Time to
imagining
get
how
this
Mary
land
would have
ready.
arranged the colors.
Morning,
He decided
mister.
to add a
Back to
small
work.
bench near the flower garden where he could sit and watch the blossoms. He carved her name into the bench as a quiet tribute. He spent evenings there, listening to the frogs in the pond and watching fireflies dance at dusk. One morning, he received a visit from a young couple interested in starting their own farm. They had heard about Earl's reputation for knowledge and integrity. They asked questions about soil health, crop rotation, and the financial realities of farming. Earl welcomed them into his barn, showed them equipment, and shared stories about his experiences. He spoke about the joys and the hardships, about the satisfaction of watching something grow from a seed, and about the pain of seeing a crop fail due to circumstances beyond your control. He told them that farming was as much a calling as a profession. He saw in their eager eyes the same determination that had driven him and Mary when they were young. As the days lengthened and the temperature warmed, Earl felt a subtle shift inside himself. The heaviness of grief still sat in his chest, but it no longer pressed down with the same weight. Instead, it seemed to weave itself into the fabric of his daily life. He accepted that his sadness would always be part of him, but he also embraced the moments of joy that came with seeing new life on the farm. He laughed when a lamb jumped clumsily, tripping over its own feet. He smiled when a flock of geese flew overhead in perfect formation. He felt gratitude for the sunrise that painted the sky with colors only nature could create. This chapter portrays the renewal that comes with spring and how the cycles of nature can mirror our own
Time to
journeys
get this
through
land
loss
ready.
and healing. It demonstrates
mister.
how
Back to
preparation,
work.
planting, and tending to new life provide both literal and metaphorical seeds of hope. It also illustrates the importance of passing knowledge to the next generation and finding meaning in small acts. Reflect on a time when you felt renewed after a period of hardship. What signs of growth or hope did you notice around you? If you want to share, add your thoughts below. The story continues as Earl moves through the seasons of his farm and his heart. Summer arrived with a burst of heat and activity.
You learn to appreciate the
fields
simple
that had
things
been bare
out here.
and brown months earlier
Hard work,
were now lush
honest
with
weather,
waist-high corn
and a
and
good
broad-leafed
sunset.
soybeans. The air vibrated with the hum of insects. The morning started early, before the sun had fully risen, and the evening stretched long into twilight. Earl rose with the dawn, walking outside to a chorus of birdsong. The dew on the grass soaked his boots, and the rising sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. He checked the moisture levels in the soil, examined the leaves for signs of pests, and monitored the weather forecast with constant attention. One of the challenges of summer was managing weeds. Left unchecked, they could choke out crops and reduce yields. Earl had always been diligent about weed control. This year, he was even more determined. He walked rows, hoe in hand, cutting weeds and pulling them up by the root. He used a sprayer where necessary, but preferred manual methods whenever possible. He thought about Mary's insistence on organic practices and her dislike of harsh chemicals. He balanced efficiency with stewardship of the land. As he bent over, row after row, sweat dripping from his brow, he remembered Mary's gentle reprimands when he had once neglected the garden and weeds had taken over. He smiled at the thought and vowed to keep her standards. Summer also meant the arrival of thunderstorms. The Midwest is known for its dramatic skies. On certain afternoons, the air would grow heavy and still. The horizon would darken as massive clouds rolled in. Earl learned to read the signs. He would secure loose items, bring equipment under cover, and hurry the livestock to shelter. When the storms hit, the wind howled and lightning flashed across the sky. Rain came in sheets, pounding the roof and turning the driveway into a river. Earl sat inside, listening to the storm's fury and thinking about the power of nature. He knew that the same rain that could flood a field could also provide much-needed moisture to the crops. He accepted that farming always involved a relationship with forces beyond his control. Between storms, the work
You learn to
continued.
appreciate the simple
Earl
things out
repaired
here.
machinery that broke
Hard
down
work,
under heavy use.
honest weather,
He sharpened blades,
and a good
greased
sunset.
gears, and replaced parts. He kept meticulous records, noting how long each machine had been running and scheduling maintenance accordingly. He took pride in his ability to keep equipment running smoothly. He knew that downtime during harvest could mean the difference between success and failure. He thought about how Mary used to tease him about his detailed logs, calling him a mechanic with an accountant's precision. He knew that her attention to finances had made it possible for him to invest in
Time to
good
get this
equipment
land
when
ready.
the time was right. Summer
Morning,
brought
mister.
community
Back to work.
gatherings as well. The county fair was a highlight. Earl had exhibited livestock, produce, and quilts there for decades. This year he decided to enter jars of preserves, using Mary's recipes. He spent an entire day carefully selecting jars, labeling them, and delivering them to the fairgrounds. He watched the 4-H competitions, admired the prize-winning heifers, and applauded the young people who recited speeches and demonstrated skills. He saw his neighbors and exchanged news. People asked how he was doing, and he responded honestly, saying that some days were hard and others were manageable. He appreciated their concern and felt a sense of belonging. One humid afternoon, Earl took a break from the fields and walked down to the pond on the far corner of his property. He had not been there since Mary died. The pond was a place where they had spent countless summer evenings, sitting on the dock with their feet in the water, watching dragonflies dart over the surface. He stood at the water's edge, remembering Mary's laughter as she skipped stones and her quiet reflections as she watched the sun set. He sat down on the dock and let his feet dangle in the cool water. He closed his eyes and listened to the gentle lapping of water against the shore. He felt a calm wash over him. He realized that revisiting this place was both painful and healing. It reminded him of what he had lost and of what he still carried with him. In the heat of midday, Earl sought shade whenever possible. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, long sleeves, and carried a jug of water. He knew the dangers of dehydration and sunstroke.
Morning,
He
mister.
paced himself,
Back to work.
taking breaks under the oak tree where Mary used to be. During one of these breaks, he caught sight of a hawk circling high above the field. It rode the thermals effortlessly, wings outstretched. He watched it for several minutes, admiring its grace and power. He thought about how Mary had often compared farmers to hawks, saying that both had a wide view of the landscape and an understanding of subtle changes that others might miss. The garden near the house flourished in summer. Earl harvested beans, cucumbers, zucchini, and berries. He
You learn to
canned and
appreciate the
froze
simple things
produce,
out here.
filling the pantry and
Hard
freezer
work,
in preparation
honest
for winter.
weather, and a
He
good
followed
sunset.
Mary's instructions carefully, sterilizing jars, checking seals, and labeling each jar with the date and contents. He took satisfaction in seeing shelves lined with colorful jars. It made him feel connected to Mary, who had always taken pride in this task. He gave jars to neighbors as gifts, continuing her tradition of generosity. Midway through summer, Earl received a letter from his son who lived in the city. His son wrote about the concrete and steel of his environment, saying that he missed the smell of fresh-cut hay and the sight of open fields. He told Earl that he admired him for continuing to farm and that he hoped to visit soon. Earl wrote back, describing the progress of the crops, the weather patterns, and the joys of simple meals made from the garden. He invited his son to come during harvest, knowing that the experience might rekindle his love for the land. As the days peaked in heat and then slowly began to shorten again, Earl noticed subtle changes. The light began to tilt differently. The evenings cooled slightly. He knew that harvest season would arrive sooner than it seemed. He started planning, checking combine parts, ordering fuel, and reviewing grain storage. He felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Harvest was the culmination of months of work, but it also brought long days, physical strain, and the pressures to get crops in before the weather turned. He remembered how he and Mary used to share meals in the field during harvest, sitting in the tailgate of the truck, laughing about how dust stuck to their food. Summer, with its abundance and intensity, taught Earl that joy and sorrow could coexist. He felt the deep sadness of Mary's absence, especially during moments she would have loved, like the county fair or evenings at the pond. Yet he also felt
Time to get
moments of
this land
genuine
ready.
happiness when a calf frolicked
Morning,
in
mister. Back to
pasture,
work.
or when a neighbor's child ran up to him with a handful of wildflowers. He learned that healing did not mean leaving behind the memory of his wife. It meant integrating her memory into his daily life, carrying her with him into each new season. This chapter captures the energy and challenges of summer on a farm and demonstrates how a season of growth can also be a time of deep reflection. It shows how community events, natural beauty, and daily tasks weave together to create a sense of belonging and purpose. It underscores that grief does not prevent joy, and that both
You learn to
emotions
appreciate
can
the simple
inhabit the
things
same
out here.
heart.
Hard
As you
work,
think about this chapter,
honest weather,
consider the
and a good
spaces in your
sunset.
life that bring both comfort and pain. How do you find balance between honoring the past and embracing the present? If you feel inspired, share your thoughts and continue walking alongside Earl on his journey. Harvest season arrived with a crispness in the air. The crops that had been tender shoots in spring and lush growth in summer now stood tall and ready to be gathered. The corn stalks rustled dryly in the breeze, their kernels full and golden. The soybeans hung heavy on their stems, pods rattling with potential. For Earl, harvest was both a marathon and a sprint. It required endurance to work long hours and quick decisions to respond to weather and equipment issues. It was a time when the planning and labor of months finally paid off. Earl prepared meticulously. He inspected the combine, checking belts, blades, and augers. He cleaned the grain bins, making sure there were no leaks or weak spots. He lined up a couple of part-time helpers from the community to assist with hauling grain to the elevator. He coordinated with the elevator operators, scheduling deliveries to avoid long waits. He stocked the truck with water, snacks, and first aid supplies. He made sure the fuel tanks were full. He double-checked his notes from previous harvests, recalling what had gone wrong and what had gone right. The first day of harvest began before sunrise. Earl climbed into the combine, turned the key, and felt the machine rumble to life. The cab was enclosed, keeping out dust and noise, but he still opened the small window occasionally to breathe in the smell of corn. He drove along the first row, the header cutting stalks cleanly and the auger feeding grain into the bin. He monitored gauges and listened for any unusual noises. The grain flowed
Time to get
steadily,
this land ready.
a stream of gold.
Morning,
He smiled,
mister. Back to
thinking
work.
of Mary and how excited she would have been to see the yield. He felt her presence as he watched the first bushel fill the bin. Harvest days were long and blurred together. Earl would start at dawn and often not finish until well after dark. He used lights on the combine to work into the night. He ate sandwiches and drank coffee in the cab. He took short breaks to stretch his legs and check on equipment. When the grain bin on the combine filled, he would transfer it to a grain cart or directly into a truck. He coordinated with his helpers, using
You learn
hand
to
signals
appreciate
and
the
cell
simple
phone
things out
calls
here.
to manage the flow
Hard
of grain.
work, honest
He
weather,
adjusted the combine
and a good
settings depending
sunset.
on the moisture content of the crop and the terrain. He felt a sense of urgency tempered by caution. Rushing could lead to mistakes. Caution could lead to delays. Finding the right balance was an art. The weather played its role. Some days were perfect, with clear skies and dry air. On those days, Earl pushed hard, determined to harvest as much as possible. Other days brought unexpected rain showers. When it rained, he had to stop, as wet grain could spoil in storage. He would take those moments to perform maintenance, eat a proper meal, or rest. He kept an eye on the long-range forecast, looking for windows of opportunity. He remembered Mary checking the weather channel and writing notes on the calendar. He now did the same, though he added his own shorthand for conditions. As the fields emptied, Earl felt a sense of accomplishment and relief. He watched as truckload after truckload of grain headed to the elevator, each load representing countless hours of work. He took satisfaction in seeing the elevator's grain bins fill. He enjoyed the camaraderie with other farmers as they waited their turn to unload. They swapped stories, compared yields, and offered encouragement. He realized that he was not alone in feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. Harvest was a shared experience, a collective effort that brought the community together. During the evening hours, when he parked the combine and looked out at the fields, Earl felt Mary's absence more acutely. He remembered the times when she would bring meals out to the field. She would set up a small table in the bed of the pickup truck, complete with a tablecloth and lantern. They would eat by lantern light, surrounded by the rustle of crops and the hum of the distant highway. She would ask about the day's progress, and he would tell her about equipment
Time to get this
malfunctions,
land ready.
yield estimates, and the weather forecast.
Morning, mister. Back
They
to
would
work.
enjoy a slice of pie and coffee before he returned to the combine. Those evenings had been both practical and romantic. Without her, he ate quickly and returned to work, the quiet of the cab feeling more empty. One afternoon, while transferring grain from the combine to the grain cart, a belt snapped. The machine shuddered and the auger stopped. Earl climbed down, examined the belt, and realized he did not have a replacement on hand. In the past, Mary would have driven into town to pick up parts while he stayed on the field.
You learn to appreciate
Now he
the
had
simple
to decide
things out
whether
here.
to drive into town himself
Hard work,
or call one of his
honest
helpers.
weather, and
He
a
called
good
his
sunset.
neighbor, explained the situation, and asked if they could pick up the belt. The neighbor agreed, highlighting how the community stepped in when needed. Earl felt gratitude for the support. While he waited, he cleaned the surrounding area, inspected other belts, and made sure the problem would not recur. When the new belt arrived, he installed it and got back to harvesting. Harvest season lasted several weeks. Each day was a test of endurance. Earl's hands grew rougher, his back ached, and his sleep was often interrupted by dreams of broken machinery or missed deadlines. Yet he also felt invigorated. Harvest was what he lived for. It was the culmination of all the planning, planting, and tending. It was the moment when the land rewarded his care. When he finally finished the last row, he parked the combine, turned off the engine, and sat in the cab for a moment, letting the silence wash over him. The field was bare, the soil showing through in clean lines. He whispered a thank you to Mary and to the land. After the grain was stored and the equipment cleaned, Earl took time to walk through the empty fields. The stubble under his boots crunched with each step. The air was cool, carrying the scent of dried corn leaves and distant chimney smoke. He thought about the cycle they had just completed. He thought about the countless harvests he and Mary had shared, and how this one felt different. It was not just because he was doing it alone, but because it marked a new chapter in his life. He had proven to himself that he could carry on, not because he wanted to prove anything to others, but because he wanted to honor Mary and the life they had built together. This chapter highlights the intensity and reward of harvest season. It shows the careful preparation, the long hours, and the reliance on community.
Time to
It
get this
also
land
illuminates
ready.
the moments of remembrance and gratitude
mister.
that weave
Back to
through
work.
the practical task. Harvest is a time when the fruits of labor are literally gathered, and for Earl, it is also a time when he gathers strength from memory and perseverance. Think about the times when you have worked hard to reach a goal and how you felt when it was achieved. What challenges did you overcome, and how did you honor those who helped you along the way? Share if you choose, and stay with us as we continue to explore the layers of Earl's journey. With the harvest complete, the farm settled into a quieter rhythm. The
You learn to
fields lay
appreciate
bare,
the simple
their
things
furrows
out here.
catching the low slant
Hard
of
work,
autumn sunlight.
honest weather,
Leaves
and a
turned
good
shades of
sunset.
amber, gold, and crimson before falling to the ground. The air became crisp, carrying the faint smell of smoke from wood stoves. Earl used this transitional time to perform deep maintenance on his equipment and to plan for the future. The change of seasons mirrored the changes in his own life. The rush of harvest gave way to reflection and planning. One of Earl's first tasks after harvest was to inspect every piece of machinery. He tightened bolts, changed oil, and replaced filters. He carefully cleaned the combine, removing chaff and dust from hidden crevices. He drained the fuel from machines that would not be used for months to prevent degradation. He stored equipment in the barn, covering it with tarps. He made lists of parts that would need to be ordered over the winter. He logged hours and service dates. Burry had always respected his meticulous approach, understanding that preventative maintenance was cheaper than emergency repairs. Earl smiled as he read through his logs and saw her neat handwriting noting past service. During this time, Earl also took stock of his finances. He went through receipts from the elevator, calculated income from the harvest, and compared it to expenses. Mary had managed the accounts with care, always knowing where every dollar went. Earl now took on that responsibility fully. He spread papers across the kitchen table, drank coffee, and worked through the numbers. He realized that the farm was stable, thanks to the choices they had made together. He thought about future investments in equipment or seed. He considered whether to lease additional land or focus on improving the productivity of his existing acres. Decisions that had once been made jointly were now his alone. He felt the weight of that responsibility and also a sense of gratitude for the foundation Mary had built. He used the quieter days to check on neighbors. He visited a farmer down the road who had suffered a broken leg during harvest. They sat on the porch drinking tea, talking about crop yields and sharing stories about
You learn to
years gone
appreciate
by.
the simple things out
Earl
here.
helped him repair a broken
work,
fence and delivered
honest
bales of
weather,
hay.
And a
He
good
visited
sunset.
the widowed Mrs. Johnson, bringing her a loaf of bread and jars of jam. He repaired a leaky faucet for a young family new to the area. In each act of service, he felt Mary's spirit. She had always believed in helping others. By continuing her tradition of kindness, Earl found purpose beyond his own farm. Autumn was also the time for reflection on the past and planning for the future. Earl took long walks around his property, observing the wildlife preparing for winter.
Time to
He
get this
watched
land
geese
ready.
gather in the pond, readying
Morning,
for
mister.
migration.
Back to work.
He saw squirrels stashing acorns in hollows. He observed deer moving through the woods at dusk. He stopped by Mary's grave, now marked with a small stone carved with her name. He placed a wreath of dried wildflowers at the foot of the marker. He spoke to her in his thoughts, sharing the events of the harvest and the small joys and frustrations of daily life. He imagined her listening and smiling. One afternoon, Earl received a visit from his eldest granddaughter. She was in college studying environmental science and had developed a keen interest in sustainable agriculture. She asked Earl about his soil management practices. They walked through the fields together, and Earl explained crop rotation, cover crops, and conservation tillage. He spoke about how he and Mary had gradually adopted practices that improved soil health. His granddaughter shared what she had learned about regenerative farming and carbon sequestration. They discussed integrating new techniques like planting cover crops to reduce erosion and increase organic matter. Earl felt invigorated by the conversation. He realized that even at his age, he could learn from the younger generation, and that Mary would have loved these discussions. That evening, Earl pulled out a notebook Mary had used to record ideas for the farm. In it were notes about diversifying crops, implementing water conservation methods, and hosting educational tours for local schools. She had wanted to share the beauty and importance of farming with children. Earl read through her ideas and felt inspired. He decided to start planning a small educational garden that would
Time to get
demonstrate
this
different
land ready.
farming techniques. He envisioned
Morning, mister.
inviting school
Back to
groups to
work.
learn about soil, plants, and the role of pollinators. He smiled, thinking about Mary's eyes lighting up when children visited the farm. He saw this as a way to honor her passion for education and to contribute to the community. As the days grew shorter and Thanksgiving approached, Earl prepared for the holiday. In the past, Mary had hosted a large family gathering. She would cook a turkey, bake pies, and set the table with her best china. This year, Earl's children offered to host, but he insisted on cooking dinner at
You
the
learn to
farmhouse.
appreciate the simple things
He wanted
out
to
here.
keep tradition alive.
Hard work,
He
honest
spent
weather,
the day before
and a
Thanksgiving
good sunset.
baking bread, peeling potatoes, and preparing stuffing using Mary's recipes. The house filled with familiar smells. On Thanksgiving Day, his children and grandchildren arrived. They hugged him tightly, some with tears in their eyes. They shared stories about Mary, laughed, and ate until they were full. After dinner, they went around the table expressing gratitude. Earl spoke about being thankful for family, community, and the land. He felt Mary's presence in every word. The chapter after harvest emphasizes reflection, planning, and the continuation of tradition. It shows how Earl navigates financial responsibilities, maintains equipment, and remains connected to his community. It demonstrates that healing is not passive. It involves taking actions that align with the values of the person you lost. It also highlights intergenerational learning and the way the younger generation can inspire the older to adopt new practices. As you reflect on this chapter, consider the traditions you have maintained after losing someone and the new traditions you have created to honor them. If you are comfortable, share your stories. Continue with us as we explore how Earl moves toward winter again, carrying the past into the future. Winter returned, bringing with it a different kind of quiet than the first winter after Mary's death. This time, the house did not feel as unfamiliar. Earl had moved through all the seasons once since she passed. He had faced each holiday and each farm task without her physical presence, and he had begun to weave her memory into every action. The second winter was still lonely, but it was also more contemplative. Earl now knew that he could survive the cold months and find purpose in routine. He entered this season with a sense of acceptance and a determination to continue building on the foundation he and Mary had created. The tasks of winter mirrored those of the previous year, caring for livestock, repairing equipment, and chopping wood. However, Earl approached them with less hesitation. He had learned from experience how to manage Mary's
appreciate
tasks
the simple
and
things out
incorporate them
here.
into his own.
Hard
He
work,
refined his systems.
honest weather,
He improved
and
his
a good
note-taking.
sunset.
He reorganized the pantry and freezer. He implemented some of the sustainable practices his granddaughter had suggested, like covering the compost heap with straw to retain heat and speed decomposition. He read more about regenerative agriculture during long evenings by the wood stove. One significant change this winter was the educational garden project. Earl cleared a small plot near the barn and built raised beds. He gathered compost, manure, and leaf mold to create rich soil.
Time to get this
He
land
built
ready.
a small greenhouse from reclaimed
Morning,
windows
mister.
that would allow
Back to work.
seedlings to start early. He labeled each bed and made a plan for what would be planted in spring. He reached out to the local school and invited teachers to bring students for a visit in the coming year. He drafted educational materials describing the importance of soil health, biodiversity, and local food systems. He felt a sense of purpose as he envisioned children learning on the farm. He knew that Mary would have been thrilled to see her ideas come to life. Earl also decided to join a farmers' cooperative that focused on sustainable practices. The cooperative offered resources, shared equipment, and opportunities for collective marketing. At the first meeting, he met farmers from surrounding counties who were experimenting with different crops and techniques. They shared successes and failures openly. He felt invigorated by the exchange of knowledge. He shared his own experiences and listened to others. He realized that he had something valuable to contribute and something to learn. Mary had always pushed him to attend workshops and learn new methods. Joining the cooperative felt like fulfilling a promise to her. During this winter, Earl spent time writing. He began to document his farm's history, starting with his father's arrival on the land and continuing through his own childhood, his marriage, and the years of building the farm with Mary. He included stories of droughts, floods, bumper crops, and lean years. He wrote about the people who had helped them, the neighbors who became like family, and the innovations they adopted. He wrote about Mary's role, her creativity, her organization, and her compassion.
Time to get this
He
land
found that
ready.
writing allowed him to process his
Morning,
memories in
mister.
a new way.
Back to work.
It gave shape to the narrative of his life and provided something tangible to pass down to his children and grandchildren. Community events continued to play a role in Earl's life. He volunteered at the local food pantry, sorting donations and distributing food to families in need. He participated in the town's winter festival, helping to set up decorations and carve ice sculptures. He attended church regularly and occasionally stayed after services to talk with others about faith, grief, and resilience. He appreciated the sense of belonging these activities provided.
You learn to
They
appreciate
reminded
the
him
simple
that
things
life
out
after
here.
loss included
Hard
not just
work,
personal healing,
honest weather,
but also
and a good
connection with
sunset.
others. One evening, As snow fell outside, Earl sat by the wood stove reading letters Mary had written him over the years. He had kept every card, note, and message. He had stored them in a box tied with a ribbon. He slowly read through them, some faded, some written on scraps of paper. In them, Mary had shared thoughts, encouragement, gratitude, and love. He cried softly as he read, but he also smiled. Her words were a gift that still had the power to comfort him. He placed the letters back in the box and returned it to its place. He felt grateful for having such a partner and resolved to continue living in a way that would make her proud. When the first students visited the farm in late winter, Earl welcomed them with enthusiasm. The children arrived bundled in coats and hats, their breath visible in the cold air. Earl showed them the greenhouse and the garden beds. He explained how compost turned kitchen scraps into rich soil. He let them feel the warmth inside the greenhouse and showed them tiny seedlings just beginning to sprout. He talked about crop rotation, soil erosion, and the importance of pollinators. He led them to the barn, where he introduced them to the livestock. He watched as their eyes widened with wonder. He smiled as they asked questions. He realized that Mary's dream of education was now intertwined with his own daily life. This chapter illustrates how the second winter differs from the first, highlighting growth, acceptance, and new initiatives. It shows Earl expanding his role from farmer to educator and community advocate. It shows how he honors Mary by bringing her ideas to life and by continuing to build relationships. It emphasizes that healing is not linear, but is marked by continuous growth and integration of new purposes. Reflect on how you have grown after experiencing loss. What new roles or projects have you taken on to honor loved ones or to find meaning? Share if you feel led to do so.
You learn to
Let us
appreciate the
continue
simple
to walk
things out
with
here.
Earl as spring approaches
Hard
again.
work,
As the second
honest
spring
weather,
arrived,
and a
the
good
farm
sunset.
felt both familiar and new. Earl had learned to navigate life without Mary, while also carrying her memory into each task. He approached the season with an expanded sense of purpose, balancing the practical needs of planting with the broader goals of education and sustainability. The garden beds he had prepared in winter were ready for students to plant. The greenhouse was full of sturdy seedlings. The fields needed tilling, seeds needed sowing, and equipment required another round of maintenance.
Time to get this land ready.
Earl welcomed school children
Morning,
for their
mister.
second
Back
visit.
to work.
The weather was warmer, and the students arrived with energy and curiosity. Earl guided them through planting seeds in the raised beds. He explained how different plants helped each other when grown together and how companion planting could reduce pests. He talked about the importance of bees and butterflies and pointed out early pollinators visiting flowers. He showed them earthworms in the soil and explained how they improved soil structure. He saw how the children's faces lit up as they placed seeds in the ground and gently covered them with soil. He encouraged them to water carefully and to visit again in a few weeks to see the progress. The experience of teaching children brought Earl a sense of joy he had not expected. He found that explaining concepts out loud reinforced his own knowledge. It also reminded him of Mary's patience and ability to break down complex ideas into simple lessons. He incorporated her teaching methods using metaphors and hands-on demonstrations. He felt her presence when he pointed out how leaves moved to follow the sun, or how roots spread to anchor plants. He realized that the act of sharing knowledge was a form of giving back, something Mary had valued deeply. The main fields demanded attention as well. Earl prepared the soil with care, using some of the regenerative methods he had learned from the cooperative of his grandfather. He planted cover crops on some acres to improve soil health. He rotated crops to reduce disease pressure. He left strips of land wild to encourage biodiversity. He monitored soil moisture using sensors and adjusted irrigation accordingly. He
Time
felt
to
a
get
sense
this
of
land
pride
ready.
in adopting practices that balanced
Morning, mister.
productivity
Back
with
to work.
stewardship. He thought about how Mary had always pushed for innovation while respecting tradition. He felt as though he was continuing a conversation with her through these choices. During this spring, Earl also faced a new challenge. A developer approached him with an offer to buy part of his land. The offer was generous, promising a financial cushion that could make his later years more comfortable. Earl sat at the kitchen table, the proposal spread out before him. He thought about the land's history. He envisioned the fields turning into housing subdivisions or commercial buildings.
You learn to appreciate
he
the
imagined
simple
the sound
things
of
out
traffic
here.
replacing the quiet
Hard
hum
work,
of insects.
honest weather,
He considered how
and a good sunset.
Mary would have responded. She had always said that the land was more than a commodity. It was a responsibility. Earl weighed the financial security against his commitment to preserving the farm. After days of contemplation and prayer, he declined the offer. He wrote a polite letter stating that the land was not for sale because it was part of a legacy he intended to protect. His decision resonated with his children. They called to express support, saying that they respected his choice to prioritize heritage over profit. His son, who had once left for the city, began to express interest in returning someday to help manage the farm. His daughter, the teacher, talked about integrating agriculture into her curriculum. Earl felt a renewed sense of connection with his family. He realized that the farm was not just his story, it was theirs as well, and he had an obligation to keep it intact for future generations. Spring was not free of sorrow. On the anniversary of Mary's passing, Earl spent the day in reflection. He visited her grave, replaced the wreath with fresh flowers, and sat on the bench he had carved. He read passages from their favorite hymns. He walked through the house, touching objects she had loved. He allowed himself to feel the sadness fully. He then spent the afternoon planting a new apple tree near the garden. He chose a variety Mary had always wanted but had not lived to see. He planted the tree with care, imagining how it would bear fruit in years to come. He saw this act as planting both a memory and a future. One evening, after a long day in the fields and garden, Earl sat on the porch watching a storm approach. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the clouds. He remembered the storms of his youth, when he and Mary would count the seconds between lightning and thunder to gauge the distance. He listened to the wind rustling through the leaves. He felt at peace. He realized
You learn to appreciate
that
the
life
simple
would always
things out
hold
here.
storms, both
Hard
literal
work,
and
honest weather,
metaphorical.
and a good
He
sunset.
could not prevent them, but he could prepare, adapt, and find beauty even in the turbulent moments. This chapter shows Earl embracing both continuity and change. It highlights his commitment to education, sustainable practices, and preserving his land. It also underscores the challenges of balancing financial offers with legacy and the emotional weight of anniversaries. It suggests that healing involves not just moving forward, but making choices that align with one's values and honoring the memory of loved ones through action. Reflect on choices you have made to preserve something
Time to get
meaningful.
this land ready.
How have you balanced practicality
Morning, mister.
with principles?
Back to work.
Share if you feel comfortable and continue the journey as we move into another summer. The second summer on the farm unfolded with a rhythm that felt both familiar and invigorating. The routines of planting, weeding, and tending to animals were punctuated by new activities like hosting school groups and participating in cooperative meetings. Earl found himself balancing tasks with a renewed sense of joy. The educational garden flourished. The raised beds produced lettuce, carrots, peas, and sunflowers. The greenhouse provided a steady stream of seedlings for both the garden and the main fields. The cooperative's shared equipment allowed him to test new methods on a small scale before adopting them widely. The summer heat brought challenges similar to the year before. Weed control, insect pressure, and unpredictable weather. Earl monitored for pests using pheromone traps and natural predators. He mulched the garden beds to conserve moisture and reduce weeds. He adjusted irrigation schedules based on rainfall. He continued to avoid harsh chemicals, following Mary's principles.
You learn
He
to
discovered
appreciate the
that the
simple things out
educational
here.
garden attracted beneficial
work,
insects,
honest
which
weather,
then moved into the
and a
larger
good sunset.
fields. He felt a deep satisfaction in seeing these connections between small and large-scale practices. Community engagement continued to grow. More school groups visited, as well as local gardening clubs and church groups. Earl led tours of the farm, explaining different crops, soil types, and equipment. He discussed the economics of farming, the challenges of market prices, and the impact of global events on local agriculture. He found that sharing his knowledge made him feel connected to Mary,
Time to get
who had
this
always
land
been a
ready.
storyteller. He saw
Morning,
the spark
mister.
of
Back to
curiosity
work.
in children's eyes and the appreciation in adults' nods. He answered questions thoughtfully, drawing from decades of experience. One July day, Earl hosted a workshop on regenerative farming in partnership with the cooperative. Farmers from across the region gathered under a tent set up near the barn. They listened to presentations, participated in demonstrations, and shared meals prepared by local volunteers. Earl spoke about his journey of integrating sustainable practices after Mary's death and how the process had been both practical and healing. He shared data on soil health improvements and yield comparisons. He invited participants to walk the fields and observe cover crops, pollinator strips, and the educational garden. The workshop fostered collaboration and a sense of community. Earl felt proud to contribute to a movement that aligned with his values. Summer also brought family visits. Earl's son and his family spent a week on the farm, helping with chores and reconnecting with the land. His son drove the tractor, his daughter-in-law helped with the garden, and the grandchildren gathered eggs, fed calves, and chased butterflies. Earl watched them with a mixture of nostalgia and hope. He saw in his son a new appreciation for the farm and an understanding of why Earl had declined the developer's offer. They discussed the possibility of the son gradually returning to take on more responsibility. Earl felt a sense of relief at the thought of not shouldering everything alone forever. The county fair rolled around again. This year, Earl entered
Time to
not
get
only
this land
jars
ready.
of preserves, but also produced
Morning,
from the
mister.
educational
Back to
garden.
work.
The carrots were vibrant, the peas sweet, and the sunflowers towering. Students who had helped plant the garden visited the fair to see their produce displayed. They pointed excitedly and took pictures. Earl felt a warm glow watching their pride. He also noticed a shift in his own emotions. Last year, the fair had been a stark reminder of Mary's absence. This year, it felt like a celebration of her legacy. He talked to neighbors about the garden, the cooperative, and the students. He saw that Mary's influence continued to
You
ripple
learn to appreciate
outward
the
through
simple
lives
things
of
out
others.
here.
Toward
Hard
the end
work,
of summer,
honest
a heat wave
weather,
struck.
and a good sunset.
Temperatures climbed, and the humidity made the air feel thick. Earl adapted by shifting heavy work to early mornings and late evenings. He installed a misting system in the greenhouse to keep plants from wilting. He made sure the animals had plenty of water and shade. He took breaks under the large oak tree, drinking water and resting. He remembered Mary's reminders to take care of himself, not just the farm. He felt her wisdom guiding him as he balanced productivity with health. The chapter underscores the interplay between tradition and innovation. It shows how Earl integrates new practices without losing sight of the values that have sustained him. It highlights the importance of community, family, and education in keeping a farm vibrant. It illustrates that healing can lead to growth, not just personally, but in the broader community. As you reflect on this chapter, consider how you have embraced new opportunities while staying true to core values. How have your personal healing journeys influenced the way you contribute to your communities? Share if you are inclined and continue with us as we approach another harvest in the ongoing cycle of life on the farm. The third autumn arrived with a sense of anticipation. Earl felt both seasoned and renewed as he prepared for another harvest. The fields were full and heavy with crops. The educational garden had produced enough vegetables to donate to the local food pantry. The cooperative had grown, drawing in more members and resources. Earl's son had begun spending more weekends on the farm, learning and helping in preparation for a gradual transition. Despite the forward momentum, challenges loomed on the horizon. A drought had gripped parts of the region, and there were rumors of a grain market downturn. Earl knew that each harvest brought unique tests. He prepared with the diligence of someone who had learned from decades of experience. He serviced the combine, checking every component. He inspected grain bins, repaired roofs, and ensured ventilation systems worked. He sharpened his planning by reviewing data from the past 2 seasons.
You learn to
He adjusted
appreciate
his
the simple
harvest
things out
schedule
here.
to account for
Hard
predicted
work,
rain and high
honest
winds.
weather,
He met
and a
with
good
his
sunset.
cooperative members to discuss backup plans and resource sharing. He consulted long-range weather forecasts. He prayed for a safe and fruitful harvest, acknowledging that circumstances beyond his control would influence the outcome. When he began harvesting, Earl noticed that the drought had indeed affected yields in certain areas. Some sections produced less than expected. Others thrived due to irrigation and soil management. He adjusted his approach, focusing first on areas most at risk of loss.
Time to get this land
He
ready.
used the data from soil moisture
Morning,
sensors
mister.
to
Back to
guide his
work.
decisions. He felt grateful that he had implemented practices that improved resilience. He thought about Mary and how she had always advocated for diversifying crops and improving soil. He realized that her forward thinking had prepared the farm for changing conditions. Earl's son rode in the combine with him. They talked about yield monitors, moisture level, and equipment settings. Earl explained why he chose certain speeds and depths. He pointed out signs of disease or pest damage. He discussed grain markets and contract options. They ate sandwiches together, sharing both information and moments of quiet. Earl felt a deep sense of satisfaction in passing down knowledge. He saw in his son's attentive listening the same curiosity Earl had once had when learning from his father. The generational thread remained unbroken. Harvest progressed steadily. The community worked together, sharing equipment when a machine broke down and helping with labor. A neighboring farmer lost part of his crop to a bin collapse, and the cooperative members rallied to help salvage what they could. Earl provided equipment and storage. He remembered how Mary had always said that kindness was most needed in times of crisis. He practiced that belief, reinforcing bonds that had lasted generations. One afternoon, an unexpected mechanical failure halted the combine. The hydraulic hose burst, spraying fluid and leaving the header inoperable. Earl and his son immediately shut down the machine, assessed the damage, and called the local parts supplier. They discovered that the part was back-ordered due to supply chain disruptions.
Time to get this land ready.
Earl felt a surge of
Morning,
frustration.
mister. Back
He
to
thought
work.
about Mary and how she would have responded with calm and creativity. He and his son brainstormed temporary solutions. They reached out to the cooperative and borrowed a hose from a member who had an extra. The downtime cost them half a day, but the support from the community minimized losses. Earl saw firsthand how collective effort could overcome individual setbacks. As the grain bins filled, Earl reflected on the fact that this harvest marked another year without Mary and another year of continued growth and adaptation. He remembered the
You
first
learn to
harvest
appreciate
after
the
her
simple
death,
things out here.
when each row was heavy
Hard
with
work,
both grain and
honest
grief.
weather, and a good
Remembered the
sunset.
second harvest when he began to incorporate sustainable practices. Now, he harvested with his son by his side, using methods that Mary had envisioned and that his granddaughter had championed. He felt a sense of continuity that spanned generations. He also felt the ache of Mary's absence, as there would always be a part of him that wanted to look up and see her approaching with a meal and a smile. When the harvest was done, Earl and his son cleaned the equipment together. They washed the combine, scraped away mud, and greased moving parts. They stood back and admired the machine, appreciating its role in their livelihood. They sat on the tailgate of the pickup, drinking coffee as the sun set. Earl talked about his father and how they had celebrated harvests by driving into town for a special meal. He suggested continuing that tradition, and his son agreed. They drove to the local diner where they ordered hearty plates and talked about the future. Earl expressed his desire to gradually hand over responsibilities, saying that the time had come to think about what retirement might look like. His son listened carefully, acknowledging that the farm was not just a business, but a legacy. This chapter illustrates the challenges and triumphs of harvest when viewed through the lens of long-term stewardship. It shows the practical issues of drought and mechanical failure, the reliance on community, and the importance of passing knowledge from one generation to the next. It emphasizes that healing does not mean forgetting. It means carrying the memory of loved ones into new chapters and decisions. As you reflect on this chapter, consider how you have navigated transitions and how you have passed on wisdom to those who come after you. Share your insights if you wish, and stay with us for the final chapter. Winter returned again, but this time Earl felt prepared for the season in ways he could not have imagined before Mary's passing. The farm was transitioning. He had embraced sustainable practices, built an educational garden, strengthened ties with the community, and begun to involve his son in daily operations. The cycles of
You learn to
planting and
appreciate the
harvest
simple things
had brought
out
him
here.
through grief and into
Hard
a place
work,
of purpose
honest
and
weather,
hope.
and a good
As
sunset.
the snow fell gently over the fields and the wood stove crackled in the corner, Earl sat at his kitchen table and reflected on the journey he had taken since the day he buried his wife. He realized that when he walked away from her grave and returned to the fields, he did not do so because he was running from pain. He did it because the work had always been their shared language. The soil held their laughter, their challenges, and their dreams. By continuing to work, he had honored Mary, not by forgetting her, but by weaving her
Time to
memory
get this
into every
land
row
ready.
he planted and every seed
Morning,
he
mister.
watered.
Back to work.
He had learned that resilience is not a denial of sorrow, but a commitment to living with it and finding meaning beyond it. This winter, Earl wrote a letter to each of his children and grandchildren. In the letters, he shared the story of the farm, the love he had for Mary, and the lessons he hoped they would carry forward. He wrote about the importance of faith, family, and hard work. He encouraged them to honor their heritage while also embracing innovation. He included practical advice about soil health, crop rotation, and the economics of farming. He also wrote about the joy of sitting on a porch with someone you love, watching the sun set over fields you have cared for together. He placed the letters in envelopes and stored them in a safe place, planning to give them during a family gathering in the spring. Earl's involvement in the cooperative deepened. He helped plan workshops, mentored younger farmers, and advocated for policies that supported sustainable agriculture. He found satisfaction in using his experience to shape the future of farming beyond his own land. He also found time to pursue quieter activities. He began wood carving, creating small sculptures and plaques. He carved scenes of barns, animals, and trees. He gifted these carvings to friends, neighbors, and family. He found that working with wood allowed him to express creativity and brought him peace. As winter progressed, Earl and his son finalized plans for the coming spring. They decided which fields to plant and which to leave fallow. They ordered seed varieties that balanced
Time to
tradition
get
with
this
new
land
research.
ready.
They scheduled equipment
Morning,
maintenance
mister.
and
Back
planned
to work.
cooperative workshops. They discussed long-term goals, including expanding the educational program and exploring specialty crops. Earl felt confident that the farm was in capable hands. He trusted his son's judgment and knew that the younger generation would bring fresh ideas while honoring the past. On a clear, winter night, Earl stepped outside and looked up at the stars. The sky was brilliant, free from the haze of humidity or summer dust. The constellations were sharp and bright. He thought about the countless nights
You learn to
he and Mary
appreciate
had
the
stood in
simple
this
things
yard,
out here.
pointing out constellations to their children.
Honest weather,
He thought about the
and a good
vastness of the
sunset.
universe and the smallness of one person's life in comparison. Yet he also understood that within that smallness was immense meaning. The love he shared with Mary, the work they did together, and the community they built mattered deeply. He walked to Mary's grave, its marker now weathered by 3 years of sun, rain, and snow. He brushed away the snow and placed a wooden carving of a sunflower he had made. He stood in silence, feeling the cold air on his face and the warmth of memories in his heart. He spoke to her in his mind, telling her about their son's involvement, about the children who had learned about soil and seeds, and about the farmers' cooperative that was making a difference. He thanked her for her love, for her partnership, and for the life they had shared. He told her that he would keep going, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He wanted to honor her by living fully and by continuing to care for the land they had nurtured together. As he walked back to the house, Earl felt a profound sense of peace. He knew that grief would always be part of him, but he also knew that joy and purpose could flourish alongside it. He understood that the act of returning to the fields after burying his wife was not an act of denial, but a declaration of love. It said that their shared life mattered so much that he would keep living it even when she was gone. It said that the land was not just soil, but a living memory. It said that resilience is built from love, work, and community. Through his journey, Earl learned that resilience is not about forgetting. It is about carrying memories into each furrow and harvest. Love does not end with a burial. It lives in the soil, the seeds, the rituals, and the hands that continue the work. He hopes his story reminds others that when life asks you to keep going after loss, you are not betraying the person you loved. You are celebrating them. The Last Farmer channel exists to honor those who walk this path with quiet strength. Join us in recognizing the heroes whose lives are rooted in faith, family, perseverance,
Time to get this
dignity,
land ready.
and community.
Morning, mister.
Share your
Back to
reflections and keep these stories alive for future generations on this channel.